Graphic new details revealed in the fourth day of the preliminary hearing in the murder case against singer David.
Prosecutors sharing a disturbing timeline of his alleged interactions with the 14-year-old victim. CBS LA's Joy Benedict live outside the courthouse in downtown LA with the graphic testimony. Joy.
It really started with the dismemberment of the body, the amputation of the fingers, including the one with the sh tattoo, as well as Celeste's eye being missing.
He still had her name tattooed on his finger when they put the handcuffs on him. Red ink, cursive. Celeste, on his left ring finger, the same finger that was missing, cut away, along with the one beside it, from the hand of the girl found dismembered inside his car. This video discusses the sexual abuse and murder of a minor. 4 days into the preliminary hearing that will decide whether D4vd stands trial for the murder of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, prosecutors have laid out the most detailed picture yet of what they say happened and why. Some of this testimony is brand new. Some of it corrects things that have been reported wrong for months. We're going through all of it. Let's start with what actually came out this week, because there's a lot. On the fourth day of the hearing, investigators told the court that Celeste was pregnant and had an abortion roughly a year before she died. That detail had never been made public before this testimony. It surfaced from witnesses called by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office as part of a broader effort to establish exactly what the relationship between her and the man known professionally as D4vd, legal name David Anthony Burke, actually was. That relationship is the foundation of the entire case. Prosecutors allege it began as a sexual relationship in November 2023, when Celeste was 13 and Burke was 18. They say the two had first connected online back in January 2022, when she was 11 and he was around 17. The welfare check from February 2024 got its own detailed hour in court, and the specifics matter. A sheriff's senior deputy testified he responded to Burke's home after Riverside County investigators reported Celeste missing. 10 minutes of that deputy's body camera footage was played for the courtroom. In it, Burke tells the deputy he met Celeste through social media and Discord, says he believed she was 18 because, in his words, she told me she was 18. And then voluntarily shows the deputies a 6th grade yearbook photo of Celeste, along with a missing person flyer, while consenting to a search of his own home. At one point on that recording, a deputy tells him, "I hope they find her." The deputies didn't locate Celeste there that day, were satisfied with what they described as Burke's cooperation, and closed out the check. She turned up again shortly after. That footage cuts both ways, and it's worth being honest about that. The defense used their cross-examination of that same deputy to emphasize that Burke told the truth to investigators in that moment and cooperated fully. Prosecutors, on redirect, tried to ask the deputy whether Burke had said anything to him about a sexual relationship with Celeste, a question that drew an immediate defense objection, which the judge sustained. So that specific exchange never got answered in open court. What is on the record unambiguously is that 14 months before Celeste died, an officer stood in Burke's home and told him she was a missing 13-year-old. Court documents also describe explicit text messages between the two of them, read into the record this week, which prosecutors say reference sex, pregnancy, abortion, and the use of Plan B emergency contraception. Investigators additionally described sexually explicit photos they allege show Burke and Celeste together. None of this has been independently verified outside of what prosecutors have presented in court, and the defense has pushed back on aspects of how this evidence was gathered. We'll get to that. One more piece of testimony from this stretch of the hearing is worth sitting with. A witness referred to in reporting only by the name Farrell testified that Celeste's age came up repeatedly and explicitly during the period prosecutors say the relationship was ongoing, saying on multiple occasions in testimony simply, she was 13. Burke, according to that same testimony, was 18 and then 19 across that same stretch of time. That's not a detail buried in a filing somewhere. It was said out loud more than once in front of the judge who will decide whether this case goes to trial. Here's the sequence prosecutors say ends with her death. On April the 22nd and into April the 23rd of 2025, court documents describe a heated exchange in which Celeste threatened to expose the relationship. To, in the DA's own words, destroy his life and end his career. Prosecutors say an Uber brought her to Burke's rented home in the Hollywood Hills that night. It was the last time anyone heard from her. Prosecutors date her murder to on or about April 23rd. Now here's the detail that deserves more attention than it's gotten. 2 days after that night, on April 25th, Burke released his debut album, titled Withered. And in between, on April 24th, the day after the alleged killing, prosecutors say Burke ordered a shovel through Postmates. Financial testimony presented at the hearing adds real weight to why that timing matters to the prosecution's theory. A finance executive from Interscope Records testified that the label's contract with Burke could have paid him as much as $19 million total, if every condition, including the release of future albums, was met. A separate financial witness put his earnings from his first 2 albums and merchandising at more than $6 million, with overall gross earnings estimated near $12 million between 2023 and 2025, on top of a $600,000 signing advance back in 2022. There's also a detail that undercuts any read of this as a settled, ongoing career. The same Interscope executive testified that the label actually dropped its option on Burke in late 2025, sometime after Celeste's body was found in his Tesla. Prosecutors are using that full financial picture directly. Their argument is that in April 2025, Burke was a rising artist with a 9-figure adjacent contract on the table and an album about to drop, and a 13-year-old was threatening to blow all of it up. Worth noting how quickly that all unraveled once the case became public. A national tour Burke had booked was canceled not long after his Tesla, and the remains inside it drew international media attention. Whether a jury ever hears the prosecution's full argument depends on what happens at the end of this hearing. But it's the through line the DA's office has built the whole case around. The hours after the alleged argument are where the case turns forensic and where cell phone data becomes its own kind of witness. Records presented this week show Burke's phone and his Tesla moving together overnight from his Hollywood Hills home out to a remote stretch of Highway 154 in Santa Barbara County. Just after midnight, an outgoing call was placed from his phone to Celeste's number, from that location. The car was back in Los Angeles by 7 the next morning, and this wasn't a one-time trip. The same 2 devices, according to testimony, returned to that same isolated spot in early May, and again at the end of that month. A detective who specializes in technology analysis told the court the cell phone records consistently matched the Tesla's own location data. The 2 moved in unison every time. 9 months after that first overnight trip, in January of 2026, a state transportation worker found something on the side of that highway, Celeste's passport card, more than 85 miles from Burke's home. Prosecutors say the repeated trips to that location were about disposing of evidence. When detectives searched the area after the passport turned up, they found nothing else there. You already know the broad strokes of how this became public, so we won't rewalk the whole thing. but two specific facts from that discovery are directly relevant to what's being argued in court right now, so they're worth restating precisely. A Tesla Model X had sat abandoned in a Hollywood Hills neighborhood for more than a month before it was finally towed, in September of 2025. At the impound yard, workers noticed the smell. The LAPD robbery homicide detective who responded that day testified he was called out for a death investigation involving a body found inside a car. When he opened the front trunk, he found a partially opened black body bag with a torso and head inside. A second bag held the rest of her dismembered remains. The deputy medical examiner who testified at this hearing described the body as so decomposed it was, in her words, unrecognizable, with one exception. A single photograph of her right hand still showed enough to identify her. On the index finger of that hand, a tattoo reading "shh." The medical examiner also testified that Celeste's remains were ultimately identified through dental records, and that at the time of examination she weighed 71 pounds and stood 5'2". Here's the detail that sat unexplained for months until this hearing connected it directly. Her left ring finger and her left pinky finger were both missing, severed, never recovered, then or since. When Burke was arrested, April 16th of this year, not the 20th, which is a date that's been misreported and is actually when the district attorney held the press conference announcing the charges. Detectives at booking photographed his hands. On his right index finger, the word "shh" in a matching style. On his left ring finger, the name Celeste, written in red. There's also a religious text tattoo on his right palm. Detective Josh Byers, who testified about identifying these tattoos, said he noticed the match almost immediately at the arrest. Prosecutors' theory, laid out explicitly in a court filing and repeated in testimony this week, is that after killing and dismembering Celeste, Burke removed the one finger that carried his own name from her body and took her pinky along with it. This wasn't a surprise revealed for the first time in court, to be clear. Celeste's mother had already identified those matching tattoos in interviews given not long after her daughter's remains were found, and the medical examiner's office had documented them independently well before this hearing. What changed this week is that prosecutors put both sets of hands side by side in front of a judge as part of the formal evidentiary record that will decide whether this goes to trial. This is where a lot of separate reporting has blurred together, so let's be precise about what's actually been established in testimony versus what's still just alleged. Confirmed, according to expert testimony, a DNA analyst told the court that apparent bloodstains recovered from a rubber floor mat, a rowing machine, and a Tesla charging cable inside the garage were a match for Celeste, and not just a loose match. The statistic given in court was that the DNA profile was roughly 1 septillion times more likely to have come from her than from a random person. That's a 1 followed by 24 zeros. This is confirmed forensic testimony, not speculation. Also confirmed, a criminalist testified that plastic fragments recovered during Celeste's autopsy were physically matched. She described it as fitting like puzzle pieces to cuts found in a blue inflatable pool recovered from the garage. Those cuts, she said, were consistent with a sharp object, not ordinary wear. A white dryer sheet was found rolled up inside that same pool. Prosecutors allege the pool itself was used to contain blood during the dismemberment. The purchase trail behind all of this was also laid out in detail. A detective testified that Burke had items shipped to his home under 2 different aliases. Under the name Travian Davis, prosecutors allege he ordered a fireproof mat, a shovel, an inflatable pool, and several chainsaws through Amazon. Under a second alias, Victoria Martinez, he allegedly ordered what the detective described as a burn box, a device capable of reaching a high enough temperature to destroy items, according to that testimony. Now here's what has been overstated in some coverage. Investigators recovered 2 chainsaws from the garage, but chemical swabs on both came back negative for blood. A third, smaller handheld saw was found in a closet inside the house, and it was never collected into evidence at all. The criminalist who processed the scene testified she determined it lacked forensic value and separately admitted under cross-examination that she was never instructed to search the second floor of the home, where a boxed item described as a burn cage was also located and was likewise never logged as evidence. There's also a detail that's almost bizarre next to everything else. The same criminalist testified she found jugs of what appeared to be fake blood, along with trays, elsewhere in the garage. Presumptive testing on that substance came back negative, and it was never collected either. Investigators also told the court they found 11 air fresheners placed throughout the Tesla, a detail prosecutors have connected to the months the car sat abandoned in that Hollywood Hills neighborhood before anyone reported it and it was finally towed. The defense's approach in cross-examination has focused squarely on these gaps. The uncollected third saw, the unsearched second floor, the untested fake blood, the unlogged burn cage, rather than disputing the DNA match itself. That's worth knowing because it tells you where this fight is actually headed if the case goes to trial. Not, was that her blood? But did investigators build as complete a case as they claim to have? Attorneys for Celeste's family, who have been present in the courtroom throughout, said outside court that much of what's being presented at this hearing was new information even to them, meaning her own parents are learning some of these details for the first time in the same room as everyone else. Her mother and father have sat through the graphic photo evidence together. Court reporting has described her mother, at points, bowing her head, looking away, and crying, while her father has repeatedly checked on her. When one particular image, the shh tattoo on Celeste's own hand, was about to be shown, the prosecutor handling that portion of the testimony turned to her parents beforehand and motioned for them to look away. So here's where this stands, in plain terms. This is a preliminary hearing, not a trial. Its only function is to determine whether prosecutors have shown enough evidence for a judge to send the case forward to trial at all. The burden of proof required at this stage is lower than what would be needed to convict. The judge is asking whether a crime was probably committed and whether Burke was probably the one who committed it, not whether the case has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. That distinction is exactly why so much graphic, seemingly one-sided evidence has been allowed in over these 4+ days. At this stage, the defense doesn't have to disprove anything. They only have to show the judge that the prosecution's case has holes big enough that it shouldn't move forward at all, which is precisely the strategy their cross-examinations on the uncollected saw, the unsearched floor, the untested blood have been building toward. Los Angeles County District Attorney Nathan Hochman has said publicly that the hearing was expected to run somewhere between 4 and 7 days total. If the judge finds sufficient evidence once testimony wraps, the case moves to trial, and an arraignment on that trial-level case would follow, along with a formal trial date. If the judge doesn't find sufficient evidence, some or all of the charges could be dismissed at this stage, though prosecutors would still have options to refile. Burke has pleaded not guilty to every charge against him: first-degree murder, with special circumstance allegations that include lying in wait, murder for financial gain, and killing a witness to a criminal investigation, continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, lewd and lascivious acts with a child under 14, and unlawful mutilation of human remains. His attorneys have said publicly, in a statement issued after his arrest, that the evidence will show he did not cause Celeste's death, and that they intend to vigorously defend his innocence. Prosecutors have not yet said whether they'll seek the death penalty. What a judge is now weighing is all of it together: the matching tattoos, the cell phone data that placed his phone and car together at a remote highway more than 85 miles from home, 3 separate times, a fragment match physical enough to be described as puzzle pieces, a DNA statistic in the septillions, a pregnancy and abortion the public didn't know about until this week, and a set of evidence collection gaps the defense is already using to raise doubt. Whether all of that is enough to send this to trial, and eventually to a verdict, is still ahead of us. This case remains in the courts, and the legal process is ongoing. Everyone named in this video is presumed innocent, unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. We'll continue following the hearing as it develops. If you want to stay updated as this case moves forward, please subscribe.